He lived in a small, run-down neighborhood where the streets were dusty, and the houses leaned a little too much to one side. People mostly kept to themselves, and life moved slowly. From the outside, everything looked quiet and dull, but inside his small home, he had a world he carried with him everywhere. A world full of sound, rhythm, and imagination. It was not a perfect world, and it did not have much money, but it had music. He had an old, battered instrument that had been passed down from someone he didn't even know. Its keys were chipped, some notes barely worked, and it made strange noises more often than not. When he played, the sounds were rough, uneven, and sometimes off-key. But he kept going. He practiced every chance he got, leaning over it in the small space where sunlight barely reached. He would close his eyes and let the notes guide him, even if the tune came out broken. Music was his escape, a way to breathe when everything else felt too heavy. People around him did not understand. Children in the streets would laugh when they saw him carrying his instrument. They would call him foolish, saying, "Why waste your time with that old thing? You can't play anything real." Even the adults, busy with their own struggles, would shake their heads and mutter about wasted potential. The boy had heard it all before, and at first it stung. But over time he got used to it. He would shrug and mumble to himself, "I play for scraps." A way of saying he did not expect much. That phrase carried a quiet pride too. It meant he loved something for its own sake, even if the world did not care. On some days he would sit by the edge of the street, practicing as people walked past. Some would stop to stare, their faces showing disbelief or amusement. He would notice them, but he rarely let it bother him. There was something comforting in the rhythm of his fingers moving over the keys, the way a simple tune could fill the small room and make it feel bigger than it really was. Music gave him space when there was no space, light when there was mostly shadow. He had dreams too, small ones that no one in the neighborhood could see. He imagined performing in a proper hall, where the music would bounce off walls made for sound, not just bricks and dust. He imagined people listening, really listening, and feeling the story he told with each note. These dreams felt impossible, yet he held onto them tightly. They were his private treasures, hidden inside a heart that had learned to survive on little, but still wanted so much. Life around him was not easy. Money was always tight, meals were sometimes meager, and there were nights when he could hear the neighbors arguing over things that felt too big for him to understand. But in those moments, the piano was a friend. Even with its flaws, it listened without judgment. It allowed him to spill his feelings into the world, and in return, it gave back something pure and comforting. The sound might crack or stumble, but it was honest, and honesty was something he had learned to value above all. At school, the teasing continued. Other children would point and laugh, whispering, "There he goes with that broken instrument again." He tried to ignore them, focusing on the tiny victories. A note played correctly, a rhythm held steady, a song finished without stopping. Each small success felt like a secret triumph. He knew that real mastery would take time, patience, and countless hours of effort, but he was willing to give it all. The ridicule of others could not reach the quiet determination growing inside him. He often wondered why no one could see what he felt when he played. The joy, the sadness, the hope that moved through his fingers. Was it so different from what they felt when they laughed or cried? Did they not understand that something as simple as music could carry a person through the hardest days? He wanted to show them, wanted to make them listen, but for now he kept it to himself. Every note played was a small act of rebellion, a way to say, "I exist and I matter." One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, he sat outside his home and played. The street was empty, quiet except for the occasional bark of a dog or the distant chatter of neighbors. He played slowly, letting the notes linger, letting the music speak when words could not. It was a new melody he had made up, one that felt like hope wrapped in sorrow, a story without words. For the first time that day, he felt completely alive, completely himself. A few children passed by, as curious as ever. They stopped and tilted their heads, not expecting much. One of them laughed, a sharp, surprised sound, and said, "What is that?" "That doesn't even sound like music." Another added, "You'll never play for anyone real. Just stick to your scraps." He smiled faintly, shaking his head. "I play for scraps," he said softly, not as an apology, but as a quiet truth. It was not a statement of failure. It was a declaration of love, a way to protect his joy from the cruelty of others. Despite the laughter, something was different that evening. The melody carried farther than usual, reaching ears that were not quick to mock. A neighbor, a woman who had lived there for many years, stopped to listen. She leaned against her doorframe, arms crossed, and let the notes fill the space between them. There was no judgment in her eyes, only a kind of quiet curiosity, a willingness to hear what the boy was saying through the piano. He did not notice her at first, too absorbed in his music, but when he looked up, he saw her there and felt a strange mix of surprise and relief. For a moment, the world outside the melody seemed to fade. He wanted to ask her opinion, to know if she understood even a little of what he was trying to express. But he didn't. Instead, he played a little louder, a little bolder, letting the music carry his unspoken words. And for the first time in a long time, he felt seen, not by everyone, not by those who mocked, but by someone who listened. That small connection, brief as it was, planted a seed of hope in his heart. The days passed, but the memory of that evening stayed with him. He continued to play for scraps, continued to endure ridicule and doubt, but something had shifted. He realized that even in a world that did not always notice or care, there were moments of recognition, and those moments could be enough to keep a dream alive. He had no idea what would happen next, or if anyone would ever hear the music he had inside him in a way that mattered. But he knew one thing for certain. He would not stop playing, no matter what anyone said. And so he practiced, every day, with patience, with determination, and with a quiet fire that refused to go out. The scraps he played for were no longer a symbol of failure. They were pieces of possibility, small glimpses of a future he could not yet see but refused to abandon. Every note, every chord, every stumble and recovery was a step forward. In a world full of doubt, ridicule, and scarcity, he found a small, unbreakable truth. His music was real, and he was not alone, not entirely. That knowledge, fragile as it seemed, was enough to carry him through the days to come, and it was the beginning of a journey that would change everything. The next morning, he woke up with the memory of the previous evening still fresh in his mind. That faint, small spark of hope felt different. It was not loud or overwhelming, but it made him feel lighter. Something had shifted inside him, and he could not ignore it. He hurried through his simple breakfast, careful not to spill the little food he had, and grabbed his worn instrument. Today felt like a day where music could reach a little further than usual. As he walked through the streets, people gave him the usual looks. Some stared, some whispered, and some shook their heads. He ignored them. His mind was not on their judgment today. It was on the sound he wanted to create. He reached a small park in the center of the neighborhood where a few benches and trees offered shade. It was quiet here, and he liked that. The open space allowed the notes to travel a little, to float beyond his own small home, and sometimes, just sometimes, someone would notice. While he was setting up, a soft voice interrupted him. "That sounds unusual." He looked up to see a woman standing a few feet away. She was older, but her face carried warmth rather than the harshness he was used to. Her eyes were curious, not judgmental. She gestured toward his instrument. "Do you mind if I listen?" He hesitated. Most people would have laughed, walked away, or said something hurtful. But there was something in her tone that made him nod. She sat on a nearby bench, crossing her legs and folding her hands neatly. He started playing, the notes tentative at first, as if testing the water, but gradually he felt more confident. He played the same tune he had tried the evening before, the one that carried hope wrapped in sadness. When he finished, she smiled gently. "You have something inside you," she said. "I can hear it. But you could do more, much more, if you had the right instrument." He frowned. "This is all I have," he said quietly, almost apologetically. She shook her head. "It's not about what you have now. It's about what you could do. Come with me tomorrow." I have a piano you can try. He blinked. Piano? He had only seen them in pictures and videos, not in real life. They seemed so big, so perfect, so out of reach. He wanted to believe her, but a small voice inside him whispered, "It's not possible. Who would let someone like you touch something so expensive?" Still, there was hope in her words, and hope had become a companion he could no longer ignore. He nodded slowly. "I will come," he said. The rest of the day felt longer than usual. He could hardly focus on schoolwork or chores. His thoughts kept drifting to the piano he would see tomorrow. He imagined the smooth keys, the rich sound, and the possibility of finally playing music that sounded the way he heard it in his head. That night, sleep was elusive. He lay in bed, fingers twitching as if they wanted to move over the keys even in the dark. The next morning, he walked nervously to the woman's house. The building was modest, set back from the street with a small garden in front. As he entered, the smell of polished wood and faint perfume filled the air. And then he saw it. A grand piano, black and shiny, almost glowing in the sunlight that streamed through the window. It looked unreal. He could not believe something like this existed in his world. She guided him to the piano. "Don't worry about perfection," she said. "Just let your fingers move." He hesitated, then placed his hands on the keys. The sound was different from his old instrument. Smooth, full, alive. He pressed a key tentatively, and it rang clear and beautiful. A shiver ran through him. It was more than just music. It was magic. For hours he played. At first he stumbled, trying to adjust to the new feel and sound. But slowly he found a rhythm, discovering that notes he had never been able to hit before now felt natural. The piano seemed to respond to him, almost as if it recognized his determination and wanted to help. He experimented with melodies, playing softly and then louder, letting the sound fill the room. Each note carried a confidence that had never existed in him before. The woman watched, offering advice when needed, showing him fingering techniques, and helping him understand how to make the piano sing. She never criticized harshly. Her guidance was patient, and that patience became another kind of encouragement. The boy felt a bond forming, a trust that was new and strange, yet comforting. For the first time, he was learning not just to play, but to express himself fully. As days turned into weeks, he continued visiting the woman's house whenever he could. He practiced in secret at first, worried that others would laugh if they found out. But gradually, the neighborhood began to notice a change. Sometimes, people passing by the open windows could hear a melody floating out, soft and surprising. A few stopped to listen, faces showing a flicker of wonder. Some whispered among themselves, asking who was making that sound. He kept his eyes on the piano, his heart in the music. His hands moved more confidently, learning the weight of each key, the flow of each chord. Mistakes still happened, but they no longer discouraged him. Each error became a lesson, a step closer to the music he wanted to create. He began to understand that skill was not magic. It was patience, practice, and persistence. One afternoon, the woman asked him to try something different. "Play for someone else," she said. "Not me. Someone who doesn't know your story. Let them hear what you can do." The idea terrified him. Performing for strangers had always meant laughter, ridicule, or being ignored. But she smiled at him, encouraging him without words. So he agreed. They arranged a small gathering at a nearby community hall. Only a few people would come, enough to test the waters without overwhelming him. He practiced every day leading up to it, refining his melodies, building confidence. The day arrived. His palms were sweaty, his heart pounding. He looked at the people sitting quietly, waiting. Some faces were familiar, some strangers. He thought of the old instrument he had at home and the many days of practice, and he remembered why he started playing in the first place. Not for them, not for applause, but for the music itself. That thought steadied him. He sat at the piano, fingers hovering above the keys. Then he began. The first notes were soft, careful, testing the air. But as he continued, he let the music flow naturally, letting the melody grow and fill the room. He played as he had never played before, each note carrying emotion, each chord a piece of his story. Some in the audience leaned forward, surprised by the sound coming from a boy they had underestimated. When he finished, the room was quiet for a long moment. Then a few people clapped softly, unsure at first, but the sound grew. The applause was not overwhelming, but it was real, and it filled him with something he had never felt before: recognition. He had shared his music, and someone had truly listened. Walking home, he felt lighter, freer. For the first time, he believed that perhaps the ridicule of others did not have to define him. Perhaps there was a place for his music in the world, a place where it could be heard and appreciated. He thought about the old instrument at home, now almost a symbol of his journey, a reminder that even humble beginnings could lead to something remarkable. The piano, the woman, and the audience had all opened a door, and he was ready to step through it, one note at a time. The boy could hardly sleep that night. His mind replayed the small applause he had received, the gentle nods of acknowledgement, and the warmth of someone finally listening to his music. For the first time, he did not feel invisible. The thought of the piano, the woman, and the music flowing from him felt like a secret treasure he now had to nurture. That treasure was fragile, delicate, and precious. He could not let it be destroyed by fear or ridicule. The next morning, he returned to the woman's house, carrying his small instrument as always. He wanted to practice, but he also wanted to learn more. She greeted him with a kind smile, noticing the excitement in his eyes. "You did well yesterday," she said. "Now it's time to take the next step. We will practice more advanced techniques and begin creating your own compositions." He felt nervous. Creating music on his own felt like walking on thin ice. What if it did not sound right? What if it was not good enough? But she encouraged him, patiently explaining that mistakes were part of the journey, that the music needed honesty, not perfection. He nodded, understanding, and placed his hands on the piano once again. Days turned into weeks. Every visit, he learned something new. He discovered how to make the softest notes sing, how to hold a chord until it resonated with emotion, how to build a melody that told a story. The piano became an extension of his own feelings, and through it, he began to understand himself more deeply. He was no longer just playing. He was speaking without words, sharing pieces of his heart with anyone willing to listen. Sometimes, he stumbled, his fingers refusing to move the way he wanted, his mind racing with frustration. But the woman never criticized him harshly. She would smile and guide him, saying, "Listen to the sound, not just your fingers. Feel it in your chest." Slowly, he learned that music was more than pressing keys. It was breathing life into sound, making invisible emotions audible. With each small success, his confidence grew. He began to practice in the small park again, this time more deliberately. His music drifted beyond the benches and trees, reaching people walking by. Some stopped and listened, their faces showing surprise or curiosity. A few whispered among themselves. Others turned away, uninterested. But he no longer cared about everyone. He played for the music itself, for the joy it gave him, and for the quiet sense of accomplishment that grew inside him. The scraps he once mentioned had transformed into pieces of something larger, pieces that could form a future he could imagine. He also started to notice small changes in himself. His posture became more confident, his steps lighter, and his eyes held a spark that had been missing. The ridicule of others no longer weighed him down the same way. He realized that their opinions were temporary and shallow, while his music was deep and enduring. And in that realization, he found freedom. One afternoon, as he practiced a new piece, he noticed a small group gathering at the edge of the park. They were not familiar faces. The boy froze for a moment, feeling the old fear rising inside him. What if they laughed? What if they mocked him? But then he remembered the woman's words. "Feel it in your chest. Let the music speak." He took a deep breath and continued. The notes floated into the air, weaving a melody of hope and resilience. The strangers listened, their faces slowly changing from curiosity to admiration. Some whispered softly, pointing at him, sharing their amazement with each other. For the first time, he saw that music had the power to stop people, even strangers, and make them feel something real. It was a revelation that made his heart swell with joy. He realized that the piano, the music, and his dedication could connect people in ways words never could. The woman watched from a distance, her eyes shining with pride. She understood that he was reaching a level beyond practice and technique. He was discovering the ability to touch hearts, to create emotions that transcended language. The boy's world, once limited to scraps and ridicule, was opening up, and he was stepping into it one note at a time. As the days passed, he continued to challenge himself. He experimented with rhythms, harmonies, and dynamics. He tried to tell stories through his music, stories of struggle, of quiet victories, and of hope. He composed short pieces, small narratives captured in sound, and shared them with the woman. She listened attentively, offering gentle advice and encouragement. Each piece was a reflection of his growing skill and confidence, a testament to the time and effort he poured into his art. Meanwhile, the neighborhood began to take notice. People who had once laughed at him now paused to hear the melodies drifting from the park or from the open windows of the woman's house. A few children who had teased him before stopped calling out, standing silently to listen. Others whispered among themselves, impressed and surprised. Slowly, the boy's music began to shift perceptions. It did not happen overnight, and it did not erase the past ridicule, but it planted seeds of respect and acknowledgement. He also faced challenges. Some days, his hands felt clumsy, or the music in his head did not match what came out of the piano. Frustration would creep in, threatening to dampen his spirit. But the woman reminded him that struggles were part of growth. She would sit beside him, guiding his fingers, helping him hear the difference between tension and flow. With patience, he learned to embrace the difficulties, seeing them not as obstacles, but as lessons. The boy also began to develop a sense of self-discipline. He set aside hours every day for practice, planning his sessions carefully. He learned to be patient with himself, understanding that progress was gradual. Every note played well, every melody completed, and every mistake corrected contributed to a steady climb toward mastery. He began to feel that he was building something permanent, something that could not be taken away by laughter or doubt. During one particularly quiet evening, he sat alone at the piano in the woman's house. The sunlight streamed through the window, casting long shadows across the polished floor. He closed his eyes and let his hands move freely, creating a melody that came from deep inside him. It was a piece filled with both sorrow and joy, a reflection of all the moments he had endured, all the small victories he had celebrated. For the first time, he felt completely at peace with himself and his music. As he finished the melody, he opened his eyes and looked at the woman. She smiled, her eyes filled with a mix of pride and understanding. "You are ready for the next step," she said softly. The boy felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. He knew that the journey ahead would be more challenging, more public, and more demanding. But he also knew that he had grown, that he had discovered a strength and passion that could carry him forward. The following days were filled with preparation. The woman encouraged him to perform for a larger audience, to share his music beyond the park and the small gatherings. The boy's heart raced at the thought. Performing for strangers had always been terrifying, but he remembered the quiet triumph of the first applause, the smiles of those who listened, and the way the piano had become an extension of his feelings. Slowly, he realized that sharing his music was not just about recognition. It was about giving others a chance to feel what he felt. He practiced with renewed focus, refining each piece, paying attention to every note, and experimenting with expression and timing. His confidence grew with each day, and so did his desire to tell his story through music. He wanted people to understand that he was more than the ridicule, more than the scraps he had once claimed to play for. He was a musician, a storyteller, and a young boy with a heart full of dreams. The neighborhood, too, began to transform in its perception of him. The same streets that had echoed with laughter now carried melodies that drew attention and respect. People began to nod in acknowledgement, some even smiling when they saw him with his instrument. The ridicule was not gone entirely, but it had lost its power. Music had created a bridge between him and the world, a bridge built on patience, perseverance, and passion. And so, day by day, note by note, the boy continued to grow. The scraps he once played for had become stepping stones to something greater. Each session at the piano, each melody practiced, and each story told through sound brought him closer to the realization that his music could change not only how others saw him but also how he saw himself. He was no longer defined by ridicule. He was defined by the music he created and the courage he displayed in sharing it. The journey was far from over, but he was ready to take the next step, and this time he would not be afraid. The day of the performance arrived with a mixture of excitement and nerves. The boy had never faced such a crowd before. He looked around the room, filled with people chatting quietly, some familiar, some strangers, all waiting for something he could not fully predict. The woman who had guided him through the journey gave him a reassuring smile. "Remember, just let the music speak," she whispered. He nodded, trying to absorb the calmness in her voice, though his heart thumped wildly in his chest. As he walked to the piano, he noticed a few skeptical faces. Some children from the neighborhood who had laughed at him before were there, staring with curiosity. He felt the old fear rise, the doubt creeping in. But he pushed it aside, remembering every hour of practice, every small victory, and every note that had carried him this far. He sat down, adjusted the bench, and placed his hands over the keys. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the memories of the melodies he had created wash over him, grounding him. He began to play softly, testing the sound and feeling the keys beneath his fingers. The first few notes were tentative, almost shy, but as he continued, the music grew stronger, more confident. Each chord and sequence seemed to flow naturally, and he allowed his emotions to guide him. He was telling a story without words, sharing the struggles and joys he had experienced, and the audience began to listen. Some people leaned forward, caught by the beauty of the melody. Others had expressions of surprise, as if they could not believe that someone they had underestimated could create such music. The skeptical children exchanged quiet whispers, their laughter forgotten, replaced by awe. The room was filled with the sound, wrapping around each listener, holding their attention in a way that words could not. The boy's confidence grew with each note. He had prepared for this moment, but he realized that the preparation alone was not enough. He had to let the music become a part of him, to let it flow through him, and to trust that it would reach the hearts of those listening. He felt a deep connection to the piano and the melodies, a sense of purpose he had never felt before. This was not just about proving others wrong. It was about expressing himself fully and honestly. He played a piece he had composed, one that captured the essence of his journey. The notes rose and fell like the struggles he had faced, the moments of doubt, and the small triumphs that had kept him going. There were moments of softness, moments of intensity, and moments of delicate beauty that seemed to hold the room in suspension. The audience was captivated, and he could feel their attention, their emotions responding to the story he was telling. As he reached the climax of the piece, he allowed himself to pour everything he had into the music. His fingers moved swiftly, confidently, creating a cascade of sound that filled the space. The energy in the room shifted, and he felt a surge of exhilaration. He was no longer playing for scraps, no longer hiding behind doubt. He was playing for himself, for the music, and for everyone who had underestimated him. When the final notes faded, there was a moment of silence, a suspended breath as the audience absorbed the experience. Then, slowly, applause began to build. It started with a few people, hesitant at first, but soon it grew into a steady, warm response. The boy opened his eyes, surprised and overwhelmed by the reaction. He saw faces filled with admiration, some with tears, some with smiles of genuine appreciation. Even the children who had laughed at him before looked amazed, unable to hide their newfound respect. He stood up, feeling a mix of relief and joy. The woman approached, her eyes shining with pride. She nodded, acknowledging the journey he had undertaken and the courage he had shown. He realized that this moment was not just about performing. It was about growth, perseverance, and the power of dedication. Every hour of practice, Every mistake, every moment of doubt had led him to this point. And now he could see the result. The music had spoken, and the audience had listened. After the performance, people came forward to congratulate him. Some asked questions about his journey, others wanted to hear more of his music. He smiled, humbled but proud, sharing a few words and feeling a sense of connection he had never experienced before. He understood that music could break barriers, change perceptions, and bring people together. It was more powerful than ridicule, more enduring than doubt. The skeptical children approached him quietly. One of them said softly, "I didn't know you could play like that." Another nodded, adding, "I'm sorry we laughed before. You're really good." He smiled gently, understanding that forgiveness and growth were part of the journey for everyone. It was a small but meaningful moment, showing that even those who had doubted him could change and recognize his talent. The boy spent the rest of the day reflecting on the experience. He walked through the neighborhood, carrying his instrument, and noticed that people treated him differently. There was a new sense of respect, a quiet acknowledgement of his abilities. He realized that this change was not just about proving others wrong. It was about discovering his own strength, believing in himself, and sharing his passion openly. That night, he returned to the woman's house. She listened as he recounted the events of the day, the applause, the faces, and the quiet apologies from the children. She smiled, saying, "You've done more than just play music today. You've shown that dedication, patience, and courage can change how people see you and how you see yourself." He nodded, feeling the truth in her words. The journey was far from over, but he had taken a significant step forward. The following days were filled with new opportunities. The boy was invited to perform at local events, small gatherings where people wanted to hear the music that had captured their hearts. Each performance brought its own challenges and triumphs, but he approached them with the same dedication and passion that had carried him this far. He continued to practice diligently, composing new pieces and refining his skills. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was a voice, a companion, and a source of confidence. He also began to inspire others. Some children in the neighborhood, who had once mocked him, now expressed interest in learning music themselves. He shared what he had learned, offering encouragement and guidance. He realized that his journey could have a ripple effect, showing others that perseverance and passion could overcome ridicule and doubt. The music that once seemed confined to scraps now had the power to influence and uplift others. The boy understood that the real triumph was not the applause or recognition, but the growth within himself. He had discovered resilience, patience, and a deep connection to his art. He had learned that mistakes were not failures, but lessons, and that dedication could transform even the most unlikely beginnings into something extraordinary. The piano had unlocked a part of him that he had never known existed, a part that was capable of beauty, emotion, and influence. As he continued to play and perform, he remembered the old instrument he had practiced on at home. It had been his first companion, his first teacher in its own imperfect way. He realized that every small step, every note played, and every moment of struggle had been a building block, preparing him for this moment. The scraps he had once accepted were now the foundation of his journey, a reminder that greatness often begins in humble places. The boy's life began to change, not just because of the recognition he received, but because of the confidence and self-belief he had cultivated. He no longer doubted his abilities or feared the opinions of others. He understood that music was a reflection of his soul, a language that transcended words and connected hearts. He was ready for bigger stages, more challenges, and the opportunity to share his story through sound. Even in quiet moments when he practiced alone, he felt the growth within him. Each note played with intention, each melody crafted with care, reinforced the lessons he had learned. He knew that the path ahead would not always be easy, but he also knew that he possessed the strength, skill, and determination to continue. The ridicule that had once defined him was now distant, replaced by the harmony of effort, persistence, and achievement. And so, he moved forward, not just as a boy who played for scraps, but as a musician, a storyteller, and someone who had learned the power of perseverance. The performance had been a turning point, but it was also a beginning. Each day, each practice session, and each performance added to the story he was creating. The piano had proven more than his talent. It had proven his resilience, his courage, and his capacity to touch lives with music. The boy woke up one morning with a sense of quiet determination. The journey he had been on had taught him so much, but he knew the final chapter of this story was not about applause or recognition. It was about fully embracing his music, his growth, and the way he could inspire others through the melodies he created. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was his voice, his expression, and his bridge to the world. He returned to the woman's house, carrying the old instrument along with him. The woman smiled, seeing the resolve in his eyes. She had watched him transform over the months, from a boy who played for scraps to a young musician capable of moving people with sound alone. Today, she said, they would prepare for a more public performance, one that would truly test his courage and skill. The boy felt a flutter of nerves, but it was different from the fear he used to know. This time, it was excitement intertwined with confidence. He had practiced tirelessly, learned from mistakes, and composed new melodies that spoke from the heart. He sat at the grand piano, letting his fingers find the familiar keys, and began to play softly, letting the music flow naturally. The piece he chose for today was special. It was a composition that told his journey, his struggles, his failures, his determination, and finally, his hope. Each note was deliberate, carrying emotion and meaning. He played with care, precision, and honesty, pouring himself into the melody. The sound resonated through the room, filling every corner and capturing the attention of anyone who entered. When the audience arrived, the boy felt a momentary flutter of apprehension, but he reminded himself that the music was bigger than any fear. People from the neighborhood, strangers, and even those who had once ridiculed him were there. Some faces were skeptical, others curious, but he did not let that deter him. He took a deep breath and began to play. The opening notes were gentle, almost tentative, but as the melody unfolded, the music grew stronger and more confident. Each chord reflected his journey, and each sequence of notes told a story. The audience was captivated, some leaning forward in awe, others closing their eyes to fully immerse themselves in the experience. The boy had become a storyteller without words, using the piano to convey every feeling he had kept hidden for so long. There were moments when the music soared, carrying energy and passion that filled the space with life. Other moments were soft and introspective, inviting listeners to reflect and feel the emotions beneath the surface. The boy played not for validation, but for the music itself, and in that honesty he found freedom. The piano became an extension of him, speaking a language that words could never fully capture. As he continued, he noticed changes in the audience. Some who had doubted him before now listened with admiration. The children who had once mocked him were silent, eyes wide, absorbing the beauty they had overlooked. Others whispered quietly, impressed by the depth and emotion in his performance. He realized that his music had the power to change perceptions, to create understanding, and to inspire even those who had been skeptical. When the final notes rang out, there was a moment of stillness, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Then, applause began, gentle at first, then growing into a warm and steady recognition. The boy stood, heart pounding, feeling a sense of fulfillment unlike anything he had experienced. The music had spoken, and people had truly listened. It was not about proving them wrong anymore. It was about showing the strength of his passion and the beauty of dedication. After the performance, people approached him, offering words of encouragement and admiration. Some wanted to know how he had learned to play, others asked about the compositions he had created. He shared a few words humbly, feeling proud but not boastful. He understood that the journey was ongoing, and that every performance, every note, was another step in his growth as a musician and as a person. The woman stood nearby, watching him interact with the audience. She had guided him, but now she could step back and see the result of his own determination and perseverance. She smiled, proud of the boy who had once played for scraps but now played with heart, skill, and confidence. He had grown not just in music, but in courage, patience, and self-belief. In the days that followed, the boy continued to practice and perform. He took small steps toward larger opportunities, always remembering the lessons he had learned. The ridicule that had once haunted him had faded into the past, replaced by a sense of purpose and the knowledge that perseverance could overcome doubt. He became a source of inspiration for others, showing that even those who start with little can achieve greatness through dedication and passion. He also helped others who were beginning their own musical journeys. He encouraged children in the neighborhood to try instruments, to explore melodies, and to express themselves without fear of judgment. His story became a quiet lesson, demonstrating that talent and determination could transform not only an individual, but also the community around them. One evening, as he practiced alone, he reflected on the journey. He thought about the days when he had believed his music was worthless, the hours of practice on a battered instrument, and the moments of doubt that had once held him back. He realized that every challenge had shaped him, every failure had taught him, and every small triumph had built his confidence. The piano had not just given him a voice. It had given him strength, resilience, and the courage to continue pursuing his dreams. He looked around the room at the grand piano, at the woman who had guided him, and at the quiet space filled with possibility. He understood that music was more than entertainment. It was a bridge between hearts, a way to communicate what words could not. And he was ready to continue walking that bridge, sharing his story, touching lives, and growing as both a musician and a person. In the months that followed, he performed in different venues, each one a new challenge and a new opportunity. He never forgot the old instrument that had started it all, the scraps he had once played for, and the people who had doubted him. Those memories became a part of his story, a reminder that perseverance and passion could overcome adversity. He played with purpose, emotion, and authenticity, touching the hearts of those who listened. The boy had transformed. He was no longer defined by ridicule or by the smallness of his beginnings. He was defined by his music, his dedication, and his courage to continue despite obstacles. The piano had proven more than his talent. It had proven the power of persistence, the importance of believing in oneself, and the beauty of following one's passion. And as he continued to play, he knew that this was only the beginning of a life filled with music, expression, and the ability to inspire others.